Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for December 31st through January 6th. This week I read 3 books, I watched 4 shows, I watched 1 movie, and I listened to 1 book. Happy New Year! We are into my 8th year of doing the weekly entertainment wrap-ups, which is just wild to think about, so that's just so cool to me. Even though I completely understand this isn't the type of content that many people like to click on, because just look at any time I do literally any other type of video and see how many people click on that and how many people click on this. But for me, it's all about the routine and the record and just being able to talk to you weekly. I just really enjoy that. First this week, and on the very last day of 2023, I finished Just One Bite. This is the 2nd book in the Timothy Blake series, which starts with Hangman, which I read earlier in the year. I think it was earlier in December, but it might have been November. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was late November. This is the North American title for this book. For whatever reason in North America, it's called Just One Bite, whereas in Australia, where it was written, I believe it's called Hunter. And then after that, I think the North American books go back to the one-word titles that are found in Australia, so I don't know why they did this. However, I do think that this is a better title for this book, so there's that. If you didn't hear me talk about the first book in the Timothy Blake series, Hangman, it's all about this guy who's a consultant for the FBI, but he collects a very interesting and unique fee when he completes a case. When he completes a case, his reward is a freshly killed convict from death row, because he is in fact a cannibal, and he's going to make that body disappear in the grossest way that I can imagine. At the beginning of this 2nd book, his employment has changed just slightly, but he's still getting his fresh supply of bodies, and while he's working he finds himself wrapped up in quite a case. In fact, a couple of different cases that seem to be twining together. And he's constantly trying to figure out how he can continue to get this stream of bodies without people finding out what he's doing with them, and the fact that he's getting them in the first place in some cases. One of the fun things about these books is every chapter starts with a riddle, and sometimes the riddle has something to do with what's going on in the chapter. Maybe all of them do, and maybe I'm just not clever enough to notice what the connection is, but it is really fun to start a chapter and be like, wait, do I know the answer to this riddle? Think about it for a bit, and if I do, I feel really clever, and if I don't, I'm like, I'll come back to it later, but I don't actually come back to it because the plot is so interesting. I want to know what's happening next. My library only has the first 2 books in this series, and there are 4 books in this series, so this is my reminder to Editing Kathy to remember to go on the library website and ask them to get the other 2 books so you can read them. Next, I finished What Lies in the Woods. This was a Book of the Month book I got for January of 2023, so it's high time I finally got around to reading it. As I talked about my bookish habits I'm leaving in 2023 video, one of the things I'm focusing on for my bookish bingo board from hell is my Book of the Month books, because I have a bunch of them that I've acquired and not read. This is about a woman who is in her early 30s, and when she was 11 she was viciously attacked by a serial killer in the woods. However, she lived to tell the tale, and her 2 best friends were actually in the woods that day and witnessed it, so the 3 of them were able to put this guy in jail. However, when they get some information that's an update to his case, they kind of come together and some things in their stories start to unravel. What I really liked about this one is it really kept me guessing. I really wanted to know who was going to be the devious party in this story, because there's always going to be at least one devious party, and there were times where I was like, it could maybe be this person over here, but there were so many different people it could be that I was never certain in what I thought was going to be the resolution. This has a small town setting. It talks about the ways that people are treated before and after something like this event. It talks about the different ways that people can accidentally influence a case. And just because something big like this has happened to you, it doesn't mean that other things in your life don't have certain impacts on you. On the flip side of that, you might have something big like this happen in your life, but you still need to go through the day-to-day minutia of living. As a side note, I also just wanted to mention that the main character in this one is bisexual, which is something you will not know if you look it up on something like Storygraph, because I found out recently that in order to be tagged with LGBTQI+ on sites like that, the book needs to be about that person kind of understanding and coming into their queer identity, as opposed to just being a queer character, and that's absurd to me. So I just wanted to point out this does have a queer protagonist. As far as I look at it, if the protagonist is queer, it's a queer book, am I right? Finally, for this section, we have a type of book that I don't think I've actually read on this channel before, at least not cover to cover like I mostly did with this one, and that's Zaitoun, Recipes from the Palestinian Kitchen. As you might be able to figure out, this is a Palestinian cookbook, and what I really enjoyed about this is there's so much flavor text to it, puns sort of intended, talking about this trip that the author took to Palestine and the occupied Palestine territories to learn from different people that live there and get these different regional recipes. Zaitoun, if you're wondering, is the Arabic word for olive, which is something that they grow quite a lot in that region. And you will find olives, and especially olive oil, in most if not all of their dishes. Okay, not all of them, but most of them. Like I said, I didn't exactly read every single word of this. Most of the recipes I actually did read through the instructions and that type of thing, but there was also flavor text on the side talking about how this recipe was acquired and memories that this recipe brought up and kind of the time of year that people tend to make that type of recipe. And the recipes that I didn't really read through happened to be the ones where they were preparing meat, because I haven't done that in over a decade, so that's not information I need. However, I would always read the flavor text about that, because even though I don't eat meat, other people eat meat. That's just a thing of life. I'm fine with that. And it is interesting to note how and when and why people would have certain dishes. As one of the many people who were interviewed for this book pointed out, you can't talk about Palestinian cuisine without talking about the problems they have actually acquiring food in their region. There are certain areas, for example, where you literally can't get certain ingredients because the Israeli occupiers have decided not to let them have those things. And because of that, there's a lot of collecting of things that grow wild on the land. There's also a lot to do with the fishing culture, but whether or not the fish is safe depending on where you're getting it from is a whole big conversation to be had, and that's had in the pages of this cookbook. And I very much appreciated that. It's a fantastic cookbook, and it made me very, very hungry while also informing me at the same time. On to what I watched this week. We watched a couple of episodes of Doctor Who. We are still with the first Doctor in the first season, and out of these two episodes, one of them took place in Cardiff and was one of the episodes I had actually seen previously, completely out of context, because we were staying in Cardiff at the time in March of 2013. There was a point in that episode actually where we were sitting there and going, but why don't they just do this? That would fix this whole problem. And I actually sent this question off to my friend Jen, who watches this channel, who is also a huge Doctor Who fan. And I was like, so why didn't they just do this? And Jen's response was basically, well, they wouldn't have a plot then, would they? So yeah, certain things are justified by it's more interesting if it's done this way, I guess. We also finished the 9th series of Taskmaster and started watching the 10th series of Taskmaster, which includes the woman who plays Jen on the IT crowd, but it took us a moment to actually place her because her natural voice is a little bit different than Jen's voice, and for whatever reason Chad actually recognized her first, which is rare because usually he is not the best at recognizing people. With Taskmaster, one of the weird things is I'm always just gonna tell you it's delightful, but I don't really have that much more to talk about. I am considering actually maybe doing a TBR where I read books by people who have been on Taskmaster, because I unknowingly actually bought one the other day, which was just a weird coincidence. There was a book that's been on my TBR for ages because it sounds interesting, and Chad took me to the bookstore when we were going up Island a couple of weeks ago, and I actually picked up this book, and then I realized that the writer of that book was actually on the 2nd season of Taskmaster, and that's why his name sounded familiar when I was watching Taskmaster. But as it turns out, there's 170 books by people who have been on Taskmaster, so maybe I should read some of them. The reason we didn't watch more Taskmaster is Chad was actually falling asleep in his very, very comfy chair. I know it's very, very comfy because we have matching chairs, and yes, they're very comfortable. And because of that, he's like, why don't you just toss on something that you're interested in, but I can fall asleep to, so I watched the entire series of Missing, Dead or Alive, which is just a 4-part documentary series. This is about crimes that were happening in, I believe, North Carolina, and it's kind of like Cops, but shot in a very cinematic way, and it also interweaves with the personal lives of officers who are looking for missing people. I don't know how much of this was manipulated by producers and that type of thing, and what the timeline really was for these different missing cases, because we got resolutions to all 4 of them, but it was just so polished that I just don't really know how much to believe it. I believe all of these cases happened. I would have to double check to make sure. I'm pretty sure it's a documentary. It was just so well tied up and so short that my brain is just is this real? But like I said, it's beautifully shot, and if you're interested in true crime, it's definitely something to check out. The other show I watched was the entire 1st season of FUBAR. I was very interested to find out that Arnold Schwarzenegger was on a TV show, because I haven't seen him in anything for quite some time, and I definitely approved of the True Lies-esque tilt that this show had, because essentially Arnold Schwarzenegger in this is playing a 65-year-old, which is amazing considering the man is 76 years old. And he is just about to retire from the CIA. However, he's pulled in for one last mission where he finds out that his daughter is actually also in the CIA, and now they have to work together to bring down this one last person. I really liked this. It was fun and inventive and hilarious at points, and everybody had all of these different things going on in their personal lives, and that was brought into things. The side characters were all great to see all this growth from, and I'm really hoping a second season gets greenlighted because I would like to know what's gonna happen after that finale. Last night I just decided I wanted to watch a movie, so I turned on the TV. I kind of picked one at random, and that one was called Totally Killer. This one's about a teenage girl who just wants to go to a concert with her friend, but her parents are very, very hesitant to ever let her out because 35 years ago, when they were about her age, there was actually this killer called the Sweet 16 Killer that killed 3 students that they went to high school with. She's basically like, yeah, whatever, that has nothing to do with me, so like, leave me alone and let me go. However, that night happens to be the first time that the Sweet 16 Killer resurfaces in 35 years. As you might guess, that means that somebody ends up dead, and there's quite some feelings there about that. However, our main character's best friend is also working on a time machine, and because of some shenanigans, the machine actually ends up working, and she finds herself back in 1987 and trying to solve these murders before they happen. It's a ridiculous premise, and I actually very much enjoyed it because you can see the juxtaposition between like things that were just fine in the 80s and things that would never fly in 2023. If you're at all interested, I would definitely recommend this movie. The audiobook I listened to this week is Belladonna. This is about a girl who, when she was an infant, she was at a party with her parents, and everybody at that party ended up dying because the wine was poisoned with belladonna berries. However, she didn't die, which is very curious to death because she should have. She ingested her mother's milk, which was infected with the belladonna berries, so she should have died too, but she just didn't. And as she continues growing up, there's certain things that happen to her where she should die, but she doesn't. She doesn't have the most stable of home lives. She's been pawned off on different relatives here, there, and everywhere. She only really enjoyed living with her grandmother, but her grandmother passed when she was young, so she's had to live with an uncle and a great aunt and all of these types of things. And these people haven't been very nice to her. They see her as kind of a curse, but they really want the money that comes with housing her. However, many of these people end up dying for one reason or another, and she quite often sees death when he comes to collect their souls. And she's pissed at death. She just wants death to leave her alone. He just keeps killing off people, and she doesn't want that because she's not going to be somebody who's going to be able to be married to anybody else in society, and all she wants is live up to what her mom was, which was this society lady. As we meet her in the first chapter, she still has a little bit of time before she comes into her fortune and doesn't have to be living with a relative anymore, and she just wants to get to that point so she can debut, so she can find a husband, so she can finally have a happy life. However, she finds herself going to the house of yet another relative and then has to solve a murder and figure out who's doing the murdering before somebody else in the house dies. This one was good. I enjoyed the main character trying to figure out her death magic and trying to figure out what she could do for this family and trying to figure out why the spirit hasn't crossed over and what happened, because the spirit can't remember exactly but knows that she's been murdered. There is, however, a relationship in here that is just a little bit on the side of things that I don't really enjoy in fiction, which is we have this character who is 19. I thought at the beginning that she was like 17, but I think she's 19 at the beginning of this. And she is actually falling for Death, like that guy that keeps showing up and taking all her relatives. And the thing about that is that's never going to be an age-appropriate gap. I don't really care that she's technically an adult. It just is a little bit weird to me because he's like an ageless entity. But I guess that's what happens when writers these days grew up reading things like Twilight. Because there's just such a huge power imbalance between somebody that was born millennia ago and somebody that was born less than 2 decades ago. And out of all of the people that Death has ever met, she's the special one. And that's just something that always kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way. It's not enough to make me not read it, but it's a little bit that I feel uncomfortable. That mixed with some inappropriate things that definitely happen in that kind of romantic storyline. I understand that this character has agency and she can like forgive people for doing things they shouldn't do, but at the same time I can't help but feel that literature like this is telling people to forgive people for unforgivable things. And it's the gray morality in that. That's kind of sitting weird with me. That being said though, I already have a hold on the second book and I should get to that in a couple of weeks, hopefully. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!